Hello, everyone, and welcome to Compliance by Design. I'm your host, Laurence Baker. Now, today I wanted to talk about efficiency, but before you all switch off, I'm not talking about it in the traditional sense. For a long time, efficiency has been shorthand for speed, faster diligence, faster execution. You need to do more with less. What I want to explore in this conversation is a different definition of efficiency, one that's about that, and more about knowing exactly where you add value, where you don't add value, and how do you build and structure an operating model around that reality. So to do that, I'm really excited to be joined today by Andrew Whittaker, Director of Legal at Precede Capital Partners. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Laurence. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Delighted to be joining on the podcast. Yeah.
Great to have you on. So I think before we kick off, for those of our listeners that don't know Precede, could you give us a brief overview of the firm and where you sit?
Yeah, of course. So, Precede Capital, we're an asset manager. We are backed by the private equity firm Precede Capital Partners. We're principally a real estate platform, advancing real estate credit. Historically, that's been on development projects and more recently bridge loans, focused on the real estate sector. So that's things like student accommodation, co-living, senior living. But we're now looking more broadly, across the full spectrum of real estate assets. So that could be offices, life sciences, and data centers, and equally for sort of built assets as well as ground up developments. So personally, I sit in the legal team. I'm sort of focused on the transaction structuring and execution side. So that's, working on all elements of transactions, but also includes the kind of critical risk and compliance considerations to make sure that we are, ticking all those boxes and protecting the business and our investors from, the huge suite of regulatory risk out there.
Yeah, really interesting. I think one of the bits you said there is really interesting. I think we'll talk about AI in a bit, but the data center angle there is, we're obviously seeing a massive boom within that space of
data
center real estate. So that's wondering how much kind of more of those opportunities, more of those transactions we're going to start to see as the world is screaming out for more compute space and data center space. So I wondered, like, on that trend, like, how is everything going? Like, I wonder if you can give the audience and me maybe a quick sense of what you're seeing across the market right now. And because we always love to hear this, but where are the pain points you're seeing or the challenges you're facing?
2026 has got off to a great start. Market was a lot stronger than we're seeing in 2025. So we're a lot busier for sure, which is great as a business. That said, I think the biggest crunch point really that we're seeing, and everyone I speak to in the market, is that deals are taking a lot longer to close. And that presents challenges for us internally, for the borrowers that we're lending to, and also, the investors' money whose capital we're seeking to deploy.
Yeah.
And that's just not, it's not just the fact that deals are taking longer to close. There's more time invested and more cost spent, but it also creates additional compliance risks for us too, as well, because you go into a deal, you start the KYC, you sort of understand who the shareholders are, who the directors are, it's not just the regulatory risk, but what the reputational risk is for you in doing that deal to that sponsor. And, new things can come out in the media. And so, the compliance burden has changed, it's increased, and the deal that you originate in month one isn't necessarily the deal in the same risk profile that you're looking at in month 6 when you're getting towards closing. So I think that's one of the biggest issues we're seeing across the market, whatever asset class you're looking at. It really is just transiting across the piece.
Do you have a sense of what is causing that kind of elongation of deal timelines?
I think it's just complexity. I think it's the capital markets we're in at the moment that sponsors are coming to you with, whether you say the deal's less bait, but perhaps they're coming to you at a much earlier stage than they would have done previously. They may not have structured their capital. So things are moving. It's much more dynamic, much more fluid. And so, things invariably change because the equity coming into these debt structures isn't necessarily determined, and that will change. And so I think things are a lot more dynamic in that regard. Yeah.
That's really interesting. As you said, it makes things more exciting and busier. Yeah, it complicates how you might have structured an operational workflow before. Actually, that now needs to change and needs to be able to flex And actually, that's another thing I kind of wanted to ask you about. It's obviously as your background within a career of legal risk and investment, how has that experience, maybe how you think about operating models now and how firms, Precede spends their time, how you build that out? And as a follow-up to that, also based on what you've just said, with these dynamic deals and these kind of changing processes, how do you approach that based on that experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the first one's probably easier to answer than the second one. I've as you know, got a huge private practice background. I spent a long time in law firms before moving in-house to Precede nearly 5 years ago now. And I mean, what I learned in private practice is really, it's about having, the right people, the right specialists in the right team. Since I've moved in-house, that's taught me that all markets we're in, I mean, you're saying, they're competitive markets. And in order to thrive, you've really got to bring a specialist skill set. You need to have the technical expertise. You're a jack of all trades. You're a master of none. And that's, I think, no less pertinent today than it always has been. And I mean, that guides, me personally, how I think about operating models, and also think for Precede generally.
Yeah.
We're sort of asking ourselves, what is our key skill set? What are our strengths? What experiences do we bring? And how do we leverage those to deliver, in the most efficient way, both for our investors and our borrowers? And so, I mean, that I think is the biggest sort of driver that informs our operating models.
Yeah. And I think it is your points on leveraging specialists where they provide the most value, I think is almost it's a great segue onto the next topic I want to discuss with you and our mate here really, which is around efficiency. So as I kind of alluded to at the top, but like for me and I think as an industry in private markets, efficiency is no longer just about speed. It used to be on the legal side, speed was critical. You wanted to get your deal teams into the deal rooms. We are seeing those initial deal timelines and that piece compressing heavily. But I think to your point there, it is about being smarter about your capital allocation. How do you use senior time? Like, how do you make sure that actually the efforts, the thought process, the judgment, etc., they're being spent on decisions that actually matter rather than things that, maybe don't need that senior level of judgment and expertise. So I think we can, for us and the audience, we're all on the same page. Like if you think about efficiency at Precede, how do you think about that outside of the speed and cost that we've discussed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think speed and cost is a factor in that, and it's obviously an important one. But I think, as I alluded to earlier, for us, it is really about having the right people in the right place doing the right job.
Mm.
And I think you've got to ask, we look at ourselves, and again, it's that sort of reflective exercise, is that who can do the job the best? Is that an internal person or internal function, or is it better served externally?
Yeah.
And you've also, as you say, you've got to look at the capital investment of that, not just, financial, but human capital and time, and developing those processes and whether it makes sense to do it internally or externally. And I'm not saying that moving externally is capital free, because you've obviously got time and cost involved in getting comfortable with those, that outsourcing process. But what you have to ask is, will that investment you're making, whether it's internal or external, further the core of the business? And, if it's an external thing, are we better partnering with someone who can deliver that function, better or differently than we can?
Yeah. And I think obviously I'm not just saying this because we're out of riding one of you guys, but I think that for me is typically where, if I again think back about my career, that's not the aperture that it was looked at. It was a very specific buckets, and that misses off a whole host of other things. I mean, I think it's really important there. You were talking about the human capital, not just cash.
Yeah.
So I wanted to maybe go, well, if we were looking at, we said there's the speed bit is in there, the cost bit is in there, the process piece is in there, and the human capital, time, resources bits in there. If you were going to look at that as a bucket, how much of that do you think about in terms of protecting the senior time versus the process versus the cost? Like, if you had to, how would you classify how you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think completely. I think, for Proceed particularly, and maybe it depends where your market is, but I think for us, that is the crux of it. We are doing, our bread and butter, or reason to be here is to originate, underwrite, execute really quite, complicated real estate financing transactions. And that it means we have to deliver both for our borrowers on that, but also our investors in securing the best returns. So I think what drives that is what to look at what our primary skill set is, what is our mandate, and allow our team to focus on that mandate. And I think that drives a lot of these operational and efficiency considerations. So, we're looking at the processes, that focus on efficiency, and I
Yeah.
think that's efficiency as we define it, which is allowing our senior team to, focus on and facilitate them achieving that goal, much as it is to protect the business from regulatory and compliance risk.
Yeah. And I think I definitely, the way I think about this is aligned with that approach. I wonder if w- when you joined and kind of when you were looking at this, was this approach kind of always your take, or was there when did that realization come that this was the way forward? And was there a tipping point when it was like, okay, actually, we have been doing more things internally, or actually we have seen X, Y, and Z happen in the market where we know we want to spend more time delivering this value? Or how was that kind of almost approach built?
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an interesting question, because when I joined Proceed, it was, basically a startup business. It had been going for about 6 months. So as you can imagine, everything was done internally.
Yeah.
But, as we've scaled, we've grown, we've matured, you get to that point of saying, well, hang on, does it make sense doing all this internally? Would it be better to partner with someone else? And, I think the classic example, I think in the compliance space, is your KYC, your onboarding. And it certainly became clear, shortly after I joining the business, that, as I mentioned earlier, the team strength is really underwriting and executing real estate loans. And if the team's got to do all the KYC work, which is a technical important role and needs to be done properly, but it isn't their primary mandate, and that was distracting from, the primary core business, which is deploying capital. So, we had conversations with Avantia, and at that point, it made sense to outsource the KYC work stream. And that's not just removing a pinch point from the business, because it's also enabled us to partner with a law firm that has necessary sort of data protection, the confidentiality requirements. And so it also builds greater trust with our investors and our borrowers that these work streams are being handled by, the right people in the right manner. And it's also had the benefit. It wasn't necessarily the primary reason of outsourcing the work stream, but to have a sort of centralized context, a single point through which all these queries are managed. And that's actually made the process much smoother, in the sense that both our borrowers, our investors, and the other co-lenders that we partner with can all liaise and coordinate through Avantia to get these sort of compliance and KYC processes done. It's actually made things a lot smoother.
Yeah. I think that's uh, one of the core points, I think, when you're thinking about, well, obviously moving from in-house, to your point, startup, all hands on pump, everyone's doing everything to get it done. But almost that strategic lens, you then step back and go, okay, well, we've talked about some of the points on internal efficiencies, where you're best spending time, but it's quite a rare, for me at least, I think that level of self-awareness is quite a rare thing, of being able to say, well, yes, actually, I could do all this, or, we could bring this in-house, we could recruit into the roles, but actually we're going to be better off taking this strategic play where we have focused on looking at kind of a specialist resource for compliance, for legal, for whatever that means. So I guess when you look across the business, that strategic approach, how do you manage that piece? It's, again, I don't know whether you want to disclose how many different kind of pieces of the puzzle you want to, you currently outsource and the partners you work with, but bringing all those pieces together, finding the right partner, or maybe it's choosing which parts you want to outsource that puzzle. Like, how did you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the point on the head that it's not outsourcing for outsourcing's sake. It's sort of looking at the business. Where are the crunch points? And as mentioned earlier, it's that exercise of looking at what can be done better.
Yeah.
Are we better doing it internally? Are we better doing it externally? And can those things be outsourced? And it's also, as you say, about risk reduction, that you've got to look at what your skill set is. And some people can actually perform that function better than you can internally. Perhaps they've invested more capital,
Yeah.
more investment in tech, processes. And so it's not necessarily that outsourcing is just moving the problem from, an internal matter to an external matter. It can actually reduce the risk for the business because you've got the assurance that someone has actually got a better skill set to do that for you. So it really is a benefit to both our borrowers and investors, if you outsource the right things. That is, KYC, it's compliance derived work streams. We don't, outsource everything.
Yeah.
But as alluded to earlier, it's the core of our business. So, maybe you'll come on to this later. For example, underwriting is the key to what we do. And, that is where we'll invest internal capital in developing models and proprietary data that we use to basically underwrite loans better and quicker for our investors. And that obviously benefits borrowers. And where it is the nucleus of the business, that is an internal investment. But where it's ancillary, for example, like compliance, that is something that we would look at outsourcing. Not to say that because it's ancillary, it's not important, because obviously, compliance and regulatory risk is critical, but you've got to look at where it's best dealt with.
And was there a again? I mean, I've mentioned this before, and I've said this to you before as well, around this being able to take that holistic view of where you spend your time is super important. Was there, going from startup to kind of beginning to outsource some of these functions, was there a kind of a cultural and operational change you guys had to go through? Because, like you said, compliance is a core part of the function and a critical piece of meeting regulatory requirements and investor requirements, etc. So I guess, was there that shift of going, well, this is what we need to change internally, this is what we need to get comfortable with, like picking the right partner is really important, and building that process and that relationship?
Yeah, completely. And I think it's a mindset thing, isn't it? You're not just outsourcing, you're effectively building a relationship with a partner. And I think that comes back to everything in life. It's, relationships and trust. And I think it's that internal mindset that once you've built that relationship and trust with a partner, it then makes sense to outsource these functions if you can. And particularly with, compliance, that's absolutely critical to the business or investors. And it's not something you're going to outsource lightly to anyone. It takes time. But I think, the trajectory builds that once you've established that relationship and trust, you then, that relationship just gets deeper and deeper, with more and more work streams being outsourced and dealt with by a partner. And particularly when you've got a sort of regulated law firm with the stamps and insurance that comes with that, it really helps, and you show your investors what you're doing, and they actually say, oh yeah, that's great, that makes sense. And, it gives them more assurance perhaps than us doing it internally.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting one, because compliance is and all the compliance people hate me for saying this, but it's a bit of an odd one, where the reason, it's going well when nothing is happening. So, you've done your check, you've ticked the boxes, you've worked out that this is something, this deal, whatever it might be, that you want to be transacting with and you want to be working with. So does it become difficult to prove the value and success of outsourcing something like that, where it's a case of nothing, we've ticked the boxes, nothing's happening, it's all green across the board? How do you translate that into success metrics for outsourcing?
Yeah, it's a very hard one to measure, in the normal sense of KPIs, because you can't set sort of numerical metrics against it. But Certainly, I mean, going back to this, the point about human capital, the team can see the value in it. They're freed up to focus on what they do, which is underwriting, executing loans. And then that goes up the chain to the board. The board can see that, look, more's being done, the risk is being managed. And then, the investors see the same as well. So I think it's quite clear. And as mentioned before, that's just the investor and the business side, but also our clients, our borrowers can see the benefits as well, in the sense that, these services can be provided in a streamlined way. And KYC can be a real bugbear, but if you've got a partner who can deliver it seamlessly, then it makes everyone's lives a lot easier.
Polite way of putting it, KYC is a bugbear.
Yeah.
I think that, just because you touched on the investors there, and I know there's within the different regions and kind of geography, there's different jurisdictional requirements and complexities that as a firm you need to be aware of, you need to make sure that you're on top of. And, if you're working with clients, they're going to potentially all want different things.
Yeah.
So if we look at those in different differing investor requirements, ESG or KYC, whatever it might be, like, how does that influence? Again, it's another wrapper around that operating model that you put together. How do you think about that, and how have you built a structure to support that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to that sort of self-reflection and analysis as to, what you can do better internally, and knowing also your business partners and who you partnered with and what skill sets they've got and what they can do externally if you were to outsource it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good example, because obviously we're an asset manager. We manage capital pots for various investors, and some of those do have more of an ESG focus. And it might be a good opportunity to talk about that. And one of which is an Article 8 fund. Those are funds that need to comply with, SFDR, disclosures. But basically that's, showing they're promoting various environmental and social practices. So when we're originating deals for, with that pot of capital in mind, we've got to, check and make sure that what we're presenting to that investor or those investors meets their requirements. And so it's a matter of building new processes, new checks, new screening tools to check that what you're presenting to those funds is going to meet their metrics.
Yeah.
And it's that reflection process again. It's like, yes, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Can we build that internally, or do we know a partner who can do that a lot better already? And I think, that is something we've done with Avantia, for example, is to build kind of automated screening checks that when we're running our KYC and onboarding processes for the loans intended for the Article 8 funds, that we are screening against their compliance requirements, and we are automated checks and just looking at who can provide those kind of processes in the most efficient manner.
Yeah, interesting. Again, it's all going back to almost having a clear view of all the requirements and what you're trying to achieve and where you want to get to, and then going, okay, where do we plug the right people in at the right place to make sure that we're meeting those objectives? So we've got that structure put together. That's really interesting. I do, but kind of before we wrap up though, and the last conversation and last topic I want to cover off with you, and obviously every time we talk about anything AI always comes up because it's the hottest thing at the moment.
Yeah.
And I especially think when we think about efficiency, that's almost the go-to in terms of, okay, well, AI can support with these bits, it's going to make more efficient, and inevitably it enters that conversation. The interesting thing I think for me as well, though, is in the conversations we've had previously, how you and the team are really kind of pushing what AI can do, where it can support.
Yeah.
There aren't solutions in the market. Actually, you're taking a really pragmatic view to identifying where those kind of gaps are and how it can support. So I guess there's two parts to this question. The first part being, how are you guys leveraging AI now, and where do you find it adds that value? And then the follow-up is, what does the future look like for Precede? Where do you want it to go to, and what's kind of your utopia?
Yeah. I mean, great question. I think, as you say, like, AI is everywhere. But, at Precede, we've kind of split this into two key areas. I mean, one is, and it's going back to that central theme of, what is the core of our business, and that's underwriting real estate loans.
Yeah.
So that is where we're sort of investing internal resource on developing our own kind of underwriting tools and platforms so that we can underwrite better and faster. And that obviously has benefits for, our investors and borrowers in the sense that, there's more comfort that our underwriting models are the best they can be. Using AI, you can do it faster. You haven't got to rely on a credit analyst modeling cash flows for several days, and that can be done much, much, much faster. So, that's where we're looking to deploy sort of internal capital. But as you say, you got to be pragmatic and say, well, can you do everything internally? And the answer, as we've alluded to before, is that's not necessarily the best deployment of capital. For more the compliance AI aspect and to leverage the use of AI for those work streams, what we've decided really is to partner with those people who clearly have the tech expertise, the platforms, and are using AI in their own processes to deliver the work more thoroughly, quicker, to a higher standard. And so, we consider that kind of indirect investment in AI. We're not directly
Yeah.
spending capital, but we're partnering with people who we know are and are really pushing the frontier on that. And so that's how we kind of do it on a day-to-day basis. And, you asked me about the future, and I think that's the way I see the future going, just getting stronger and more, bifurcated in that way, that where we can find partners who are really using AI, great, we'll partner with them and build a relationship. And I think that is where you get the efficiency.
Yeah.
But then, to the extent it relates to the core business, it will be greater investment in, proprietary modeling and AI and proprietary data to assist the business, which is the underwriting and execution of loans. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that is really interesting. I think within the market on one side, we are seeing more and more of the kind of big Gen I LM providers deploying their own tools. But then on the flip side, we're also seeing firms don't have the time to train, might not have the time to learn new stuff. So actually that partnering model to go, well, I still need that strategic layer over the top, but I want you to be faster, cheaper, better, and data led. So you get the best worlds in that way. And I think we're going to almost see that, continue seeing that divergence where you're going to have specialist services wrapped up in that partner model, and then things that you need to deliver in-house or that can be delivered can be kind of data and number crunching to really kind of undervalue that piece. But that's going to be able to be developed and built in-house. So,
and I think you hit the crux of that as well, is that it's not just a sort of capital investment here, it's a financial capital. That, introducing these AI platforms to the business has a huge human capital cost in, the time taken to train them up, to get comfortable with them. Again, like relationships and trust, like, do you trust your AI?
yeah.
And it's a huge investment to develop and train them in that way. So it's finding perhaps a partner externally who's already gone through that investment and leveraging that, as well as investing in your own sort of core systems and platforms.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I think it's at least the amount of times that previous to Avantia, I've been at places where they've deployed a new piece of technology, new piece of software, and adoption's been on the floor because no one has the time on top of their day jobs to learn something new, to add everything they need to add to it, to train, to build. Like, it's such a lift. And I think that offsets the efficiency piece. So you might not see the adoption happening for it. This is a waste of time end to end.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, and it's certainly the case with off-the-shelf products as well, that, we're always sort of focused on what's unique, what can we tailor to our needs. And that's why, working with a partner who has the skills to tailor their product and their services to what you need is also really, really helpful.
definitely agree with that. We've been talking about having this conversation for a couple of months now, and I'm really glad we've managed to have it because it's been hugely interesting for me, and I know it will be for the audience as well. And I think the key takeaway for me is from this conversation is being kind of pragmatic, taking a holistic view across everything you're doing, and then really having the ability to let yourself focus on where you're best spending your time. So whether or not that is underwriting on your side and spending the senior time, the team's time on that, or whatever it might be, actually outsourcing it's not a compromise. Actually, it's more of a strategic choice to go, this is how we drive the business forward. We're picking the right paths and we're doing the right things. But this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Andrew. I'd love to have you back on again. Thank you everyone for listening and watching.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Thanks, Laurence.
Thanks, Andrew.